Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast, part of the National Bleav Network. And can you believe Texans training camp starts Wednesday? Can't wait to see and hear reports from camp. But while we're waiting, and in case you somehow missed it, I want you to look and listen back to a couple of insiders I had on from the Vikings and Jaguars a couple of months ago after free agency, who gave us the scoop on new O-lineman Cam Robinson and Ed Ingram and new wide receiver Christian Kirk. Feels like everybody's talking about the rookie wide receivers, Higgins and Noel, but Kirk, you'd assume, will be the starter in the slot. Robinson was the starting left tackle in minicamp, so he should get the nod in training camp and to start the season. So hearing about these guys is key. You're going to want to listen to this. Last week, we compiled a show with all the insiders we've had on who've covered the Texans rookies throughout their college career. Check it out if you missed it. And for Rockets fans, I had on two insiders this past week who covered Kevin Durant, Clint Capella, and Dorian Finney-Smith in Brooklyn and Atlanta. For Astros fans, Ballpark Nation's James Christopher and I looked at the Astros at the All-Star break. And this week, Astros minor league expert Jimmy Price joins me to break down the Astros draft. Since today, July 20th, is the 56th anniversary of the moon landing, let's hear a quick story from our archives from former Astros Archivist Mike Acosta about how one of the Apollo astronauts, who's remembered for hitting a golf ball on the moon, once snuck hot dogs to Astrodome fans.
When they opened up the Astrodome and they had the skyboxes, 53 skyboxes on the top level, level 9, Roy Hoffines felt that they could put the most expensive seats in the house above the upper deck. A lot of people thought that was nuts at the time, but he proved that was right with these private boxes. But then they had a private restaurant called the Skydome Club up there. And it was a Japanese steakhouse with, these wallscapes of the universe and black lights. And they had these invisible clear chairs, that people could sit in to where it kind of simulated like they were floating in space, and all this luxury that was up there. And it was prevalent throughout the Astrodome. But Alan Shepard was a partner in one of these skyboxes, and he loved hot dogs. Of all the things that they had up on the skybox level, they didn't sell hot dogs. They had them down on the upper deck, which was another 2 floors down. So he asked the server in the suite, in the skybox, if, hey, I'll give you some money. Could you run down there and pick up some hot dogs for us up here? And the server went down there and said, yes, Mr. Shepard. So he brought him back up. But then what happened was Alan Shepard brought his own hot dog machine. There's a little bun warmer and a little roaster and everything, and set it up in the skybox. And back then, the Air Serv was the concessionaire at the Astrodome. His name, if I remember correctly, his name was Frank Keogh, I Bleav. I'm almost 100% certain. Frank Keogh. So he was like the director of AirServe back then, the concessionaire. He's like, oh, we can't have any outside food coming into the stadium. And, he kind of refused and told Alan Shepard he couldn't have it here. Alan Shepard was real good friends with Roy Hoffines. Alan Shepard was one of the guys that Roy Hoffines called and said, look, we're changing the name of the team from Colt 45s. We've narrowed it down to either Stars or Astros. And that's the type of guy that Alan Shepard was to Roy Hoffines. I mean, he confided in him and actually valued opinions. When he found out Roy Hoffines was called by Alan Shepard, and Roy Hoffines is in his private suite in right field, and Alan Shepard's up on the skybox level, he says, hey, this guy, we're over here and we can't have these hot dogs and we're starving. And Roy Hoffines goes over there and shows up in the skybox, says, no, it's okay. It's totally okay. Let him have the hot dogs. We don't have hot dogs up here. And so they AirServe changed their tune. Shepard's Special Hot Dogs was the nickname of his little machine, and they kind of became a little popular thing amongst the other skybox holders around him, where he kind of shared with the other skybox patrons around him. So that was something that I think a lot of people had never heard about before, and I'm not sure I had tweeted that before because it's a little bit of a longer story, but that's one of my favorites.
What a gem of a story by Acosta. Check out our Houston Sports History playlist, where we've got over 200 fun interviews with legendary Houston players, media, and so much more. One quick thought on the Astros before we get to the Texans. Next year is the final year on Lance McCullers' contract, and you have to start wondering if he's worth a roster spot next season. And 11 starts, his ERA 6.90, his WHIP 1.737. He's a pitcher who's always struggled giving you 6 innings. His control's never been pinpoint, but what he gave you was elite stuff. The electric breaking pitch worked off a really good fastball. The arm injuries, though, they've killed the velocity, and now he can't get hitters to chase when he's not throwing strikes. It's an ugly 5.9 walks per 9 innings. The arm injuries have taken their toll. I mean, he'll always have a place in our heart for being the heart of the early dynasty and a key guy on both championship teams. If you take out his last playoff start, the clunker versus Philly in the World Series, he was an absolute clutch player, nails in the playoffs, 2.77 ERA in 18 games. But this could be, and maybe should be, McCullers' last season. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. And as always, help us out by sharing our content on social media. Tell your friends. Once you've subscribed on YouTube, make sure you check for notifications so you see our new content. Every subscription inspires me to keep going. For all you regular viewers, thank you so much, because in the last year, we've had 400,000 views on YouTube. In September, our show celebrates 12 years, the longest running weekly Houston sports podcast of any kind. If you can find one that's run longer, let me know. And I mean, when we started this, the Astros were a laughingstock, and now they're a decade-long dynasty. So you're welcome, kids. Maybe we'll say that one day about the Texans. And speaking of the boys on Kirby, let's go to those insiders breaking down the Texans free agents additions. And joining me for some insight into Texans' new offensive linemen, Cam Robinson and Ed Ingram, is Vikings Insider and Bleav colleague Mike Wobschall, host of the Bleav and Vikings podcast. Good to have you back on, Mike. Seems like the Vikings and Texans, they seem to be doing a lot of shuttling players between the two teams.
Yeah, that has happened the last couple off seasons. You're right. And I think it's working out for everyone too. At least from the Minnesota standpoint, I think you'd say that. And hopefully Danielle Hunter played well, or you thought he played well for you guys. It looked from afar like he had a pretty good season.
Apparently Caserio thought he played pretty well because he got a brand new extension with some big money attached to that one for another year. So hopefully the Texans will have him for a couple of years now. Let me start off with Cam Robinson, who right now we're assuming is the new starting left tackle for the Texans. Fans remember him from his years in Jacksonville after he was drafted in the second round back in 2017. Mike, the Vikings traded for him in October. What can you tell us about how he looked in Minnesota?
I think the final verdict on Cam as a Viking, I would say he was okay. And I actually say that with the needle pointing a little bit more on the positive side than on the negative. I think, he was okay. You could interpret that as negative, but I want that to be interpreted as mostly positive. I give Cam a lot of credit, Robert, because the Vikings traded for Cam on October 24th after their Week 8 loss to the Rams, in which Christian Darrisaw tore his ACL and MCL. So you have the Minnesota Vikings in the midst of what's shaping up to be a pretty good season with Sam Darnold at the end of October, losing one of their 3 most valuable players in Christian Darrisaw for the rest of the season. So the Vikings trade for Cam Robinson. Cam Robinson started the next week for Minnesota and started the rest of the season. The Vikings won 9 straight games until they lost the regular season finale to Detroit and then a playoff game to the Rams. So I give Cam a lot of credit for stepping in and doing that. Not many players have been asked to do that in the last 20 years. In fact, only a couple. One of whom was also a former Viking, Bryant McKinnie, who was traded from the Ravens to the Dolphins, I think in 12 and 13 maybe, and started the next week. So Cam's he's a solid player, right? Second round pick out of Alabama, played and started in 101 games. He had an ACL, I think, in 18 and a meniscus in 23. But other than that, he's made all the dances. And I think you can win with Cam. I don't think Cam is a dominant player that you can put on an island every snap and never worry about. I think you have to scheme with Cam, but I think he's a solid player. He's not going to embarrass you. I like the Laramie Tunsil trade for you guys, and I think Cam's a good stopgap until you find a long-term solution there. So I think that's a fair assessment, Robert, of Cam. I'm not overly negative on it. I'm not calling him a surefire all-pro for you either. I think he's a solid player.
The choice the Texans made was it feels like a cheaper Laramie Tunsil. And one issue that the Texans had with Laramie Tunsil last year was penalties. Did I read this right? Did he have 13 penalties?
Yeah.
Cam last year? Is that
Yeah,
right?
he did. He had too many penalties. That ranked 132nd out of 141 rated players. So that's an issue for Cam to clean up. He's better as a pass protector than he is as a run blocker, but I think that's okay at left tackle, and I think that's okay when you have Joe Mixon. But yeah, penalties are an issue for him, and he surrendered some pressures and some sacks. Robert, he did, and he's not Laramie Tunsil, he's not Christian Darrisaw, but he's not an embarrassment. He's a guy that an offensive line coach can get his hands on, and then an offensive coordinator can scheme around, and you can win for sure with Cam Robinson. You don't have to win in spite of him. He can help you win.
Yeah, you talked about his run blocking 59.9 according to Pro Football Focus, so not that great. But his pass block grade last year, 70.4, which above average by their standards, pretty good. It's over 70 every one of the past 4 years, which is very good. Doesn't match, though, with the fact that, from what I read, he allowed the most offensive tackle pressures in the NFL. But one Viking follower said, and I want to get your thought on this, that has a little bit to do with Sam Darnold not exactly getting rid of the football quickly.
You're right. I mean, pass protection is a combination endeavor. Any of us who have watched the game, listened to those talk about the game, or talk about the game ourselves like you and I do, Robert, we know that. Receivers got to get open, quarterback's got to throw the ball, and the line's got to block. So I don't throw all that at the feet of Cam Robinson, and I give Kevin O'Connell and Wes Phillips, the offensive coordinator, Kevin O'Connell, the head coach, a lot of credit for winning 9 straight games with a left tackle that they traded for midseason. And I give Cam Robinson a lot of credit for stepping in and playing the way he played for the Vikings. I think he was having a pretty good season in Jacksonville before they traded him. It's not easy to step in, play for the Jaguars 1 week and then the Vikings the next at left tackle. I mean, that's not easy, and he did it. So, look, it's free agency, Robert. Like, more times than not in free agency, there's something that's up with the guy you signed that led to him being on the market and being available to you. The Vikings, everyone is saying they are, winning free agency. They are killing free agency. None of the guys the Vikings have signed played a full season last year. They are all hurt. I mean, and that's part of why they're on the market, right? And all of those guys could end up being productive players for the Vikings in 2025, but they were all injured last year. So the Vikings are getting guys that have a few dings and scratches on them on the free agent market. The Texans are getting a guy in Cam Robinson, and we'll talk about Ed Ingram, I'm sure. They're getting guys who've got some flaws in their game. That's the nature of free agency. But you can't only rely on the draft to fill your roster. You have to supplement and enhance it in other ways. And free agency is one of those main ways. And I think Cam Robinson is just fine as a member of the Texans. I do think the Texans need to address left tackle in the long term with a draft pick, because Cam Robinson is going to be running short on time. He's on the back 9 of his career for sure. But in 2025 with CJ Stroud and Joe Mixon, I think you can win with him.
Last thing on Cam, there were reports the Patriots might have been interested in him, but their O-line coach is Doug Marrone, who knows Robinson from his Jags days. And one report said Marrone was not interested because of Robinson's football character. What was the word on Robinson as a locker room guy in Minnesota? Was there any discussion about how that went?
There wasn't discussion about that, Robert. So I guess I can't really offer much insight there. That was never a headline, a talking point. It was never really a story here. It was really more positive about Cam being able to come in the middle of a season at left tackle and start the same week he was acquired. So, look, Doug Marrone has a lot of respect in the league, and if that's his viewpoint, which I don't know if that's a stated viewpoint or if that's a speculated viewpoint, but if that's his viewpoint, that should not be taken lightly, because Doug Marrone would know. He coached him. But from my standpoint, analyzing the Vikings all season last year, I give Cam a lot of credit from a football character standpoint doing what he did.
All right, Mike, the Vikings drafted guard Ed Ingram in the second round out of LSU 3 years ago. What can you tell us about Ingram as a player? You got a chance to see him quite a bit.
I would say with Ed Ingram, there is one part of his game that needs to be fixed. And if that one part is fixed, I think the Texans have a player who's got some runway and potential. Ed Ingram is in a different stage of his career, Robert, than is Cam Robinson. Cam Robinson is over 100 games into his career and was drafted by the Jags, I Bleav, in 17. Ed Ingram was drafted in 22, I Bleav it was. So, he's got 40-some games, 46 games with 41 starts to his record. I mean, Ed Ingram has a little wear and tear, but not much. He was benched last year because the Vikings couldn't fix this issue. And so in Minnesota, Ed Ingram doesn't have a great reputation in terms of a player. He was benched. Interior of the offensive line has been a weakness for the Vikings for the last few seasons, and Ed Ingram has been a mainstay there. So there's negative connotation to Ed Ingram's ability here in Minnesota. The issue, Robert, is that he, on occasion, will get beat very quickly at the line of scrimmage. And the problem there is it ruins the play. There's no recovering from that. At right guard, if you get beat very quickly, very early in the down, if you get beat at right guard, the play is over because the tackles or linebacker who's pressuring is going to penetrate and there's going to be a tackle for loss or a sack. And that happened a lot with Ed Ingram. So his mistakes were huge mistakes. When they happened, they weren't minor mistakes that you could get around or that a quarterback could make up for. And then you had Kirk Cousins and Sam Darnold. Kirk Cousins not mobile at all. So when Ed Ingram would get beat, the play was over. Now, CJ Stroud is not, Mr. Mobility, but he's also not Kirk Cousins. He can move around a little bit. And the Texans probably know that this is Ed Ingram's flaw, and they probably have a plan for him. So I'm not going to go through some of the numbers in the PFF grades because they're pretty ugly for Ed. But I think Ed is a big, strong guy who can anchor really well, who, when he doesn't get beat early, will give you a good rep more times than not. So I see why Houston identified him as a guy to bring in and work on. He's a project. Your offensive line coach will have some work cut out for them here, but he's not like a plug and play instant great player for you. You got to work on him and he's got to get better.
Yeah, pretty cheap. They gave up a 6th-round pick, so I assume it's just, if he works out, great. If he doesn't, they can just release him. It's 6th-round pick, I think, to Caserio, or just trade chips to get these guys that are, maybe projects, maybe they work out. But the thing was, Mike, instead of improving this past year, it looked like he got worse. He gave the most pressures in the league, from what I read. Yeah. What's going on? Was there an injury involved, or did he actually get worse this year?
He got worse. He got benched. I mean, he was a 2nd-round pick, Robert. I mean, he from LSU. He came in with some promise. Guys that size, 6'3", 307. He just turned 26. He out of LSU, the profile is there. I mean, he should be good, but again, he has a tendency to he'll whiff early in a down, or a guy will with agility and quickness will get past him early in the down and the play's over. Now, a lot of that was with Kirk Cousins who wouldn't move. So CJ I think has got a little more ability. So 1 out of 3 or 4 of those times, maybe CJ can make a play and avoid it. But I hope that there is a tape of the Ed Ingram early down whiffs that they're going to go over with him and say, like, here's the common thread. When this happens to you, let's fix it. Because if that is fixed, he's a more than serviceable player in my view, particularly in the run game, where I think he can be a really physical, dominating run blocker. And when he gets his hands on you, you're pretty much done. But sometimes he misses, and then the play's over.
Yeah, I guess they traded away one guy that was an issue in a 1st-round pick that looked like he was going nowhere in Kenyon Green, and they traded back for another guy that has some similar issues, because I Bleav that the top 4 guys in pressures this past year were Ed Ingram, Kenyon Green, and Lake Tomlinson, 2 that are now Texans and 1 that they got rid of. So it doesn't make a lot of sense for Texans fans, but these are stopgap measures, I feel, and they're going to be doing some stuff in the draft too. Let me ask you, Mike, the Vikings, how did they do this free agency, and where are they right now? Obviously, Sam Darnold no longer a quarterback for the Vikings.
Yep, Sam Darnold signs in Seattle. He was not tagged. He was not re-signed. I don't think there was a huge effort to re-sign him. I think the Vikings were in on J.J. McCarthy ever since they drafted him, and they knew that he'd be their starter at the latest week 1 of 2025. So I think the Rodgers stuff was overblown and overhyped. I don't think the Vikings were a serious contender for Rodgers ever. I don't think they ever seriously consider bringing Darnold back because they're in on JJ McCarthy, and everything the Vikings have done since they've drafted JJ McCarthy, they've operated like a team that has a quarterback on a rookie contract like the Houston Texans. And when that is your case, that's a financially advantageous position to be in because you can spend elsewhere, and the Vikings have done that with Grenard and Cashman and Van Ginkel. And then this offseason with Will Fries and Ryan Kelly and Jonathan Allen. So it's been an active and an exciting offseason or free agency for the Vikings because of all the players they've signed. They've transformed their offensive and defensive lines, Robert. They are a more physical group on both sides of the ball because of who they've signed. Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen to beef up the interior, and Will Fries and Ryan Kelly from the Colts to beef up the interior of the offensive line. So transformative free agency period for the Vikings in the trenches. They bring back Aaron Jones. They trade for Jordan Mason to give them 2 backs who can bring some physicality in the running game, especially Jordan Mason. And so they added Isaiah Rodgers to their secondary. They re-signed Byron Murphy. So it's been pretty active and pretty impressive this offseason for the Vikings. It has a lot of fans pretty optimistic.
Yeah, I was about to say, I assume the fans are optimistic right now with the direction the Vikings are going. And one of the things that, we're not going to get to see you guys this year, the Texans and the Vikings, and the way things went last year, I'm sure Texans fans might be pretty excited that they're not going to see the Vikings because that was one of the uglier games of the year for the Texans. And for our listeners, our viewers, give me your takes. What do you guys think about these couple of deals and what the Texans have done to bring in the 2 Vikings offensive linemen? And let me know what you think in the comments. And don't forget to support us by subscribing on YouTube, giving this show a thumbs up, and you can listen on the go with your favorite podcast app. Give me a little bit about what's going on with what you've got, Mike, and where people can find you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's Bleav in Vikings. So your viewers and listeners are familiar with the Bleav Network. I do the Vikings show, as you mentioned at the top. A lot of fun. 2 to 3 times a week during the season. It's former Vikings offensive lineman Bryant McKinney who joins me. Throughout the year, I have former Vikings safety Anthony Harris, who also played for the Eagles. So we had a lot of fun sort of talking playoffs while the Eagles were making their Super Bowl run. So I love doing the shows on Bleav. Going to continue to do that throughout the offseason and into next season. So that's the main place to find me. But I'm also on all the other places like you are, Twitter. I have a Substack, so people can go and find my work on Substack as well. And I like to do a TikTok video every now and then. So it's a lot of fun. This is a fun time of year for in the NFL calendar for sure. A lot of content, a lot of opinions, and I love interacting with fans. I love it when fans sort of dictate the content, react to the content, and exchange ideas. So it's a lot of fun joining you on your show as well. Definitely appreciate you having me back. So, and there's more to come, I think, in the free agency cycle. There's 2nd and 3rd tier players, Robert, but there's still going to be players who are signed. We're going to have NFL owners meetings this week. We're going to have rules changes to discuss. The draft, of course, is coming up. So a lot of fun stuff still ahead here in the offseason.
He's at Wobby, W-O-B-B-Y. If you're listening on audio, if you've got the video, you can see it up on your screen. But thanks for doing this, and thanks for giving us a little time last second with all this stuff going on so quickly.
Always happy to do it. If there's ever another former Viking who finds his way to Houston, look me up. I'd love to join you. I always have fun.
Joining me to give a little insight to newest Texan wide receiver Christian Kirk is co-host of the Touchdown Jaguars podcast, James Johnson. Pleasure to have you on, James. And what was your reaction just from a Jags angle on the Christian Kirk trade?
Yeah, I was a little shocked because the news was at first that they were just going to release him. We have seen this in the past, though, especially in the Trent Baalke era, although this is a new regime, which we'll talk about it probably, I'm sure. But we have seen where, it looks like a player's getting released, and then next thing you know, hey, a team called, maybe last minute, whatever the case may be, and made us an offer. And now, instead of just releasing them, we're sending them to the Texans. I was shocked, as I mentioned to you beforehand, that, they were doing a deal with the Texans. But nonetheless, man, it's still a situation where it makes a lot of sense for both teams. From the Texans' perspective, it makes sense from, when you evaluate the roster, Tank Dell in that situation, right? I think I just read earlier this week that he's going to have ACL surgery. So he didn't have that process taken care of initially, which, that could be procedural thing or whatever the case may be. So
it's not his first surgery, and we expect him to be basically out for next year, and hopefully his career is not ending. So yeah, the Texans were desperate, just from their perspective.
Right. And why not, if you're the Texans, go to a place you're familiar with? They've got plenty of film on Christian Kirk, right, through their games against us. So from that perspective, it makes a lot of sense. And I just hope this one doesn't bite us in the behind, right, so to speak, because while Deshaun I almost said the wrong quarterback there. While CJ Stroud is somebody who struggled a little bit last year, he kind of declined a tad bit last year. He's still very talented, and with a talent like Kirk, I think they can make some good things happen for that offense.
What are the Texans getting with Christian Kirk? What are his strengths? We'll start off with that.
Yeah, they're getting somebody who flourished against, man coverage in the slot a lot. It was a lot of times where they did double move type of concepts out of the slot. He'd get open. The one that stands out to me the most was, I'll never forget it. It was the Saints game when we played the Saints about 2 years ago. And I think it was, I forgot who the slot player was. I'm blanking. I think it was maybe Tyrann Mathieu beat him on a one-on-one with a double move. And Christian Kirk was off for the races. So, a guy that could get you a lot of yards after the catch, because it wasn't a real deep concept that he caught. Got some yardage after the catch and just took it home, man. I think that was a Thursday night game. That's why I remember it like that. But they're also getting a good leader, a guy who, he obviously has ties to Texas because he went to A&M. So, it's a place he's somewhat familiar with. That's pretty much it, man. A guy that's going to work hard with your quarterback. Him and Trevor Lawrence were real close, right? I wouldn't doubt that he would do the same and be the same with CJ Stroud as well. He's going to be somebody who puts in the work with Stroud day and night. He'll probably link up with Stroud in the offseason, and they'll put in some work that was, something him and Trevor were notorious for, was working during the offseason and just gathering the whole receiving core and passing game as in general. Like, they were kind of big on doing that and working out together. So you guys are getting the total package, man. It's just, after the injury, you have to wonder, like, does he come back full speed? I know it was an upper body injury, not like pertaining to his legs or anything, but does he come back full speed? Does he look like Christian Kirk of old? And if he does, this is one that could turn out very well for the Texans and not so much for the Jaguars.
Yeah, and I want to get to the injuries in a little bit later and get into more detail, but just from a standpoint of his weaknesses, what do you see his weaknesses are? I understand maybe not the best hands in the world. Is that something that you would consider a weakness?
The drops did concern me. Now it was one where, I think our fan base was a little too harsh on him, where he dropped one, albeit, it was in, a pivotal moment of the season for us, at least. It was in the first game of the year, which that game would have been a tone-setting game for us. And, when you're coming from where the Jaguars were coming from, they really needed to beat Miami week 1. But he had a drop where a lot of people were a little too hard on him here, where, like, I think what it was is, how Miami has the overhang, and the ball basically went from, he was in the area of the field where basically the sun hit him right in the eyes as the ball was coming to him. But it was some other drops that's concerning, like it was looking like at times he was fighting the ball, which, mechanically you don't like to see that. And, he's a receiver who, if that's the case, like, he's veteran savvy enough to correct those things like that. But yeah, definitely the hands were concerning. And I think a lot of people here in Jacksonville, they love Christian Kirk, and, a lot of the reaction when he left was for the most part positive, that we'll miss him. But I think at the same time, the Jaguars fans, especially, coming from his position, we're ready to stop being around the top of the league and drop passes. So that, that could be a key reason why he's no longer here for sure.
I noticed his yards per game dropped down to 47.4 yards this past year after being over 65 his first couple of years in Jacksonville. Is there anything that accounts for that? What happened there?
Yeah, admittedly, I think, Trevor struggled at times in the beginning of the season, so that didn't help. I never have been a fan, especially under Doug Peterson and Press Taylor, never was a fan of the offensive line. Like, I don't think our offensive line has been that great. And it was admittedly, it was a Trent Baalke built line. So I guess it don't all fall on Doug and Press Taylor. I do think like a lot of it was attributed to a slow start from the offense, and the offense trying to like find themselves and trying to come off of what was a losing streak the previous year. And they really were struggling with that and scripting early in games and getting going early in games. And I think like that hurt Kirk's stats a lot is, I think like he was at his best probably, in my opinion, when they started off hot. And that was something they routinely struggle with offensively here these last few years or so.
Did you feel like the Jags could have gotten more out of Christian Kirk? Did Trevor Lawrence get the most out of him? That offense, did they get the most out of Christian Kirk?
Now, the year they went to the playoffs, certainly, yes. But as of last year, no, I don't think they got the most out of him. A lot of it was attributed to, just the offense sputtering, last year as well. But last year, not so much. That's not to say, and I would say before the injury, especially, I think, he had a few good years left in him. Again, it's an upper body injury, not a lower body injury. I think, coming to Houston, that he should be fine. And I think like that, as I was saying, like I was expecting him to blow up last year, minus the injury. Then the injury happened. I wouldn't be shocked if, he picked up where I thought he would pick up off last year with the Texans. Again, just granted the injury, don't really affect his range of like arm motion, his upper body range or whatever, which I don't think it should. We haven't heard anything about like, him having setbacks or anything like that. Yeah, that's what I would say there.
The Jags played him a lot more in the slot last season than outside, 82% of the time. Of the wide receivers who had 40 or more targets from the slot, his depth of target was 13 and a half yards, which was second in the NFL. So he gets downfield. Do you think the slot, James, is his ideal spot?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Getting somebody that can pick up where young Tank Dell left off. As you said, he's dealing with his situation. He'll be back, hopefully full speed. Wish him a speedy recovery. But yes, he is a deadly slot option. He flourished with double moves. I don't know, like I know you all fired Bobby Slowick, right? So I don't know, like what the new offensive coordinator kind of likes to do there. But I wouldn't be shocked if, they like to see him in a lot of double move situations there, yardage after the catch, even though you mentioned he does get good depth. He's good after the catch as well. Like that's one of the things that, that'll always stand out about him is he would catch the ball at times not so deep and make something out of nothing, here in Jacksonville. So, yeah, he's definitely a player you guys should be excited about in terms of what he can do in the slot, even though, again, I know y'all moving on to a new offensive coordinator.
Yeah, and new offensive coordinator that loves guys in the slot. He was in New England for a few years. Of course, we know what they used to do with Brady there. And then he's been over with the Rams and Sean McVay. I want to ask you a little bit more about the injury in a second. But before we roll on, I just want to remind our listeners and fans, I want your reaction. What do you guys think of Christian Kirk and the trade? What other moves should the Texans make this week in free agency? Let me know in the comments. And if you missed it earlier this week, Locked On Astros host Brett Chansey joined me to talk about burning spring training questions. You can support us and get updates on the content by subscribing on YouTube. We consistently put out some content every single week, weekly for almost 12 years now. Give us a thumbs up too and listen in your car or while you're out and about with your favorite podcast app. All right, James, I want to get back to the injury for a sec. Christian Kirk, he's missed 14 games the last 2 seasons. 2 years ago, a groin injury, which those soft tissue injuries, they can be a little bit concerning. Last year, a broken collarbone. I assume, if everything goes okay, I mean, that shouldn't affect much about him like you were talking about. How concerned should Texans fans be about the injury history? The first year he was with the Jags, he played all 17 games. Some little stuff, I guess, in his Cardinal days, but how concerned should they be?
With receivers, this is a personal belief. The older they get and the closer to 30 they get, people should definitely be mindful of soft tissue injuries, right? Because they linger when you're pushing 30, they linger a little bit longer, as opposed to when you're younger. And then, it's been occasions where we've seen receivers at that age range where they'll get a soft tissue injury and then sometimes they'll get another one or they'll re-aggravate it. Granted, that was, some time ago. What I said all of that to say this is, when you're dealing with soft tissue injuries with a receiver that's pushing 30, it's something to be mindful of because it can linger a little bit more, in my opinion, than it would with the younger receiver, especially with, receivers and how much they use their legs and they put stress on their lower body. And the older you get, some receivers put a little bit more stress on that part of their body because they're trying to overcompensate for something they're losing and that's diminishing. So it would be something worth watching. Now the upper body injury, the shoulder injury, I think, again, as I was saying, I think he should be fine. Typically receivers come back with no issues from that, and they have their upper body range of motion. So I don't think that one will be an issue. But yeah, I guess ultimately time will tell. I'm very cautious with receivers that are around that age range when it comes to injuries and, monitoring them. But with Houston, I think he'll be okay for the most part.
Yeah. Texans have had some injuries with their wide receivers. That's why I think about it first, because, Nico's had some games where he's missed the last few years. Stephon Diggs missed the last half of last year. So it just hasn't worked out real well for the Texans there. You guys, it wasn't just Christian Kirk that you moved on from. The Jags released tight end Evan Ingram, wide receiver David Duvernay, cornerback Ronald Darby. Maybe I missed a couple more guys. How do you feel about those moves?
I totally understand it. When you have a regime change, right? And we've had many of them, we would know. Typically, they do start with impactful moves like that and multiple moves like that. And a lot of these people are people from the free agency class as soon as last year, right, that Trent Baalke brought to Jacksonville. And I think me and you have had this discussion before in the past where I wasn't the biggest fan of Trent Baalke and his team building abilities. And I can see why another GM wouldn't be. Right. And especially a younger GM who is more in the new school range. We all have heard the jokes about his age and, him being 34, James Gladstone, he's my age. So he's I'm a little older than him by a year or two. But for a GM, that is pretty young. Right. But that being said, I'm not shocked, especially, a lot of people look at the Evan Ingram one. Right. For example, that one did not shock me, even though I was on record for saying I would keep Ingram. But that one doesn't shock me because you look at Liam Cohen's history, you look at James Gladstone history, they like tight ends who are on the field closer to that 90% area in terms of offensive snaps. And with Evan Ingram, you're limited what you get in terms of if he's blocking. So that being said, you look at what's on the roster after Evan Ingram. And you have a guy like Brenton Strange, who is, that's what he was known for in college, is both blocking and his ability as a pass catcher, but more so as on the blocking end. And I can see why James Gladstone would fall in love with an option like him, who's much cheaper, by the way, that saves you money. But a guy like Brenton Strange, who made a lot of money for himself blocking at Penn State, and also he's taking the steps year by year in the NFL as a pass catcher. So they see an ascending player there where it might not be easy to replace Evan Ingram, but they have certainly a guy that fits them more like a shoe in Brenton Strange.
Well, you talked a little bit about the front office changes there. And like the Texans with Nick Caley, the Jags used their big offseason moves to go after guys with experience at the Los Angeles Rams. And head coach Liam Coen, an OC under McVay 3 years ago, and GM James Gladstone comes from their front office as well. What do you think overall of the hires? What's the temperature there in Jacksonville about it? Is there optimism now?
Oh, certainly. The moment that, whoever your favorite insider is, Ian Rappaport or Adam Schefter or Mike Garofalo, the moment they put that tweet out that, Trent Baalke was gone, and, you never wish ill on the person who's feeding their family, through their job. But Trent will be just fine. Trent made a lot of money with us. But the moment that tweet went out that that he was gone, it was a sense of relief because we knew, and especially, the fan base knew that taking a half measure, which a half measure is changing the coach, but not the GM, wasn't going to result in a good thing because it was going to always end like it always ends with Trent Baalke, with the power struggle, right, between the coach and him. Trent Baalke's roster building, as I mentioned earlier, just nobody was really a big fan of it. So when that announcement was made, albeit, Shad Khan did it late, but, we'll take it's better late than never, as the old saying goes. There was a relief. And then, for them to go to, a lot of people will critique it, which I mentioned earlier about them going to a younger option, way younger option, the youngest GM in the league. And I think in history, he might be the second youngest GM to ever hold a title. I have to check my facts on that. I think Barry from the Browns was 32 when he got his job, if I'm not mistaken. But for them to go to a younger option, a lot of Jags fans are looking at it this way. While the rest of the league and others might be like, that whole staff is a little young. Jags fans are looking at it like, well, we've tried the route of older veteran coaches, and we've tried the route of older veteran GMs that had already been somewhere previously. And then even before that, Tom Coughlin, right? Tom Coughlin as the EVP did not work out well because he didn't gel well with younger players. So from the perspective of the fans, we love it. Because, we needed to try something fresh, something new, something innovative. And Shad Khan even said that before hiring Gladstone. And I think a lot of people are excited about the youth movement because it's something we haven't had in a while. Now, going back to before Coughlin, they did have Dave Caldwell, who was a younger GM. The few of the fan base that is concerned, that's why they're concerned, because the Dave Caldwell era did not go all that great aside from that magical run when they made the Saxonville, defense and all of that. But this is much different than when Dave Caldwell was there. The roster was bare when Dave Caldwell built it. James Gladstone has inherited a roster with almost pretty much many of the premium positions fixed. We would think quarterbacks probably fixed. The edge rushing positions are fixed with Walker and Josh Allen. And they have arguably a top 10 wide receiver. That's another position, premium position that's fixed. Really, all James Gladstone and Liam Coen really need to fix is the secondary, of course, but more so in the trenches. We just got to get better in the trenches, which is way much easier than fixing a lot of premium positions like the GMs of the past have had to do.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting what they do with all that stuff, especially Trevor Lawrence. I'm interested to see how things change there. If we could see a little bit better Trevor Lawrence, but we got to talk down the road for sure with you guys. Just love the show over there. He's at sportsgrind_Don on X, the podcast Touchdown Jaguars. Anything else we can plug for you, James?
You got it. You got it to the T. We appreciate you always, Robert, having us on. And sorry, my LED light went out here, and that's why it got a little dark here. But apparently my little LED light here went out. But yeah, no, we appreciate you having us on. One more thing I could plug is the website. We'll get articles on there soon. It's touchdownjaguars.com. Been a while since we posted articles, but with free agency coming up, with visits, draft visits coming up, we'll get some more content up on there as well. And of course, draft content, as me and Phil, we typically go to the Jaguars facility to cover the draft as well.
Yeah, you and Phil do a great job over there, and can't tell you how much we appreciate you taking the time. It's a huge deal in Houston, of course. Thanks so much for doing this.
Absolutely. No problem, Robert. And thanks for having me.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.